The President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. Before we proceed to the co-prosecute, indeed, we now proceed to the prosecution. You may now proceed.
Mr. Kim Vun, I'm still at this stage asking you questions about B20 at Stung Trong prior to any move towards Phnom Penh. At B20, who was your boss?
Response: at B20, Ban was my boss.
And who, please, did Ban report to?
Response: he reported to upper echelon, but I don't know who they were.
At B20, was there a headquarters building?
Response: there was no building because during the wartime we was located in the banana plantation. We had to have the office under trees or rubber trees to just avoid being bombarded. And the office was normally covered by it's a kind of thatched roof huts.
Now, you mentioned Ban being your boss. Who was in overall charge at B20?
Response: Bang was still the person who was overall in charge of the place.
During the time you spent at Stung Trong, did you ever see, and for translation purposes I stress the word see, not meet, did you ever see any leaders at B20?
Response: in 1975, immediately after the liberation of Phnom Penh, I rarely saw any leaders except Madame Yon Yat.
Mr. Kim Vun, can I make it clear I'm still at B20 in my questioning? I'm not talking about 1975 and when you got to Phnom Penh. I'm talking before that period. So I'm going to repeat the question again. At B20 at Stung Trong, did you ever see any leaders?
Response: yes, I did, but only Mrs. Yon Yat.
Now, in your OCIJ statement, and can I give some pages, please, to this next question? The relevant document was E3/380, Khmer RN 00357200, French 00485433, and English 00365645. Now, on that page, you mentioned the words basic study sessions. Were there ever any basic study sessions at B20?
Response. In general, all combatants during the front had to attend study sessions, the political study sessions, so that we could be instructed on how to gather forces to liberate the country.
Can you just explain that in a little more detail? So there are meetings about guarding forces to liberate the country. Were there any other subjects that came up in these meetings?
Response. During the study sessions at that time, the content of which were more about the war, about our devotion, sacrifice, and struggle. Although we could never end up being sent to the battlefields, we may work at the rear, like in the printing house. We were instructed through the sessions to have strong solidarity among ourselves, and at the same time we were asked to maintain top secrecy, because failing to do this we could end up being bombarded or shot at by our opponents. Sometimes we could be killed. In the study sessions, people discussed about how to be very vigilant, how to perform our duties very well.
Mr. Kimball, thank you for that comprehensive answer. Who would be speaking to you at these sessions?
Response. At B20, so far as I remember, Mrs. Yonyat would be the only speaker.
You mentioned in another part of your evidence earlier this morning about being motivated and encouraged. Was that ever a feature of your life at B20 at Stung Trong? Response. Yes. Who would motivate and encourage you?
Response. As I already stated earlier on, first, Brother Ham, who encouraged me, and also I was encouraged by elder brothers who worked there. At no time had I not been encouraged by people surrounding me, because at that time I was young and I had to be far away from home for several years, and I oftentimes was homesick and I missed my family and parent. So without encouragement and motivation among ourselves, we could have never performed our work enthusiastically very well.
When Brother Hem was encouraging you and motivating you, what would he say?
Response. As also stated previously, that's the way we were encouraged.
In your time at B20 at Stung Trong, what happened during the period of Khmer New Year?
Response. I do not recall having noted any events during the New Year, but I think there was an event concerning the white Khmer after the victory in the battlefields of the Funk. Problem concerning the white Khmer would be raised. However, I have no idea what the Khmer saw or white Khmer could have been, but we overheard that there was fighting, the fighting that was staged by this group in the rear.
You spoke earlier this morning about issues for the front being inclusive of news from the battlefields. Now, if you take your marker in time as being you arriving in Phnom Penh, but I'm moving backwards from there, can you remember what the last news was from the battlefields when you were at Stung Trong?
Response. The last news was the offensive attack on the 1st of January, because the 1st of January was part of the ultimate goal for the offensive attack by the Funk.
Which area of the country was being attacked on the 1st of January?
Response. It was concerning the battlefields surrounding Phnom Penh.
Who gave you the news from the battlefields surrounding Phnom Penh?
Response. News from the Funk normally would have been sent through telegrams. The telegrams that would be sent to the leadership before being sent to us. And the actual news to be broadcast were to be taken directly from the battlefields concerning the practical situation in each respective battlefield.
In the days leading up to you leaving Stung Treng, did you receive any instructions about where you were going and what your duties were going to be?
Response. To be prepared to take new tasks, my superior told us to prepare for that, because he told us that the victory was nearing. And we also heard about this on radio broadcasts. And the radio station at B20 was broadcasting this piece of information. And people from the printing house also worked for the radio station. They had two jobs at the same time, working at the printing house and the radio station.
So when you were at B20, before you moved to Phnom Penh, these radio broadcasts, how often do these radio broadcasts at B20 take place?
Response. The radio broadcast would be on air on everyday basis. It started from the morning concerning information fed from the battlefields.
Whose voice then would be speaking during these radio broadcasts?
The President, witness, could you please hold on? The mic is not yet activated. Wait until you see the red light before you respond. Response. During the front period, there were 4 people who were reading the news: Comrade Pai, Son, and Yate. At the beginning, there was only 1 woman, but later on, Comrade Mull was added to form a group of 4 newscasters.
Did you ever hear any leaders speaking on the broadcasts?
Response. In the broadcast, we rarely heard the voices of the leaders, except the statement by a person I don't remember, but there were some statements by the leaders.
I just want to clarify that. There were some statements by the leaders on the broadcasts from B20, but you can't remember the content. Is that fair?
Response.
Mr. Kimvon, I'm afraid I didn't pick up the response from that. I was asking you to clarify this, that during the period that you were at B20 at Stung Trong, there were broadcasts by leaders, but you can't remember the content. Is that fair?
The President, witness, you may now respond. Response. Yes.
You've described being in a boat. You've described being in a boat that you finally end up at Phnom Penh. But when you were in the boat, did you know where you were going? To which city?
Response. We had to stop by the Prehket Tokmelia hospital. It was the place where we stopped after we left Prek Dam.
Just want to go back, if I can, please, to the broadcasts. How many people were in the radio group at B20?
Response. I remember only the newscasters. There were 5 of them, 3 men, 2 women.
Can you tell us what was the last piece of writing that you were involved with before you left B20?
Response. In the magazines, the news content would be more about the battlefields or statements by the leadership. For example, statements appealing combatants and the popular mass to unite together to fight the victory, to win the victory.
And I'd just like to be clear, Mr. Kimborn, if I can at this point. Are you still copying out handwritten news, or is there in fact any printing press of any kind at B20?
No.
Response. At B20, I still had to write text by hand.
You've mentioned statements by the leadership at B20, so written statements by the leadership. Which members of the leadership had written these statements?
Response. I do not know who wrote them because there were several writers, but the main statements were from Mr. Khieu Samphan.
Right, can we pause? You're at B20. The main statements are from Khieu Samphan. Just roughly, how many statements were from Khieu Samphan?
Response. The statements were written into several pages, but I don't remember them all because one given statement contained more than 10 pages. I do not know whether or believe that Mr. Khieu Samphan wrote the statement all alone. In the CPK, without any decision made by then Prince Norodom Sihanouk, he would not be able to write such statement, but that's my speculation. But in principle, the Funk statement or the leader of the Funk statement would never have the clearance or would never be able to write any statement without the clearance by the former prince.
If there was a statement by Khieu Samphan, how would that get delivered to B20?
Response. Messengers would ferry the statement that were handwritten or typed to be sent to us.
If there was a statement by Khieu Samphan, how many copies would be made of the statement?
Response. I do not know how many copies were made, but the statement were also copied or read in the radio broadcast and as part of the news broadcast.
I just want to be clear on this. If there was a written statement by Q Sompon, are you saying that was also broadcast?
Response. So far as I remember, the statement was rarely read live. Normally, the statement would be recorded and the statement would then played back on air.
But would it be the voice of Q Sampan on air on the broadcast?
The President. Witness, could you please hold on? The mic was not yet activated. You may now proceed. Response. Most of the texts were recorded in a tapes before they could be played back and on air.
But would it be Q Sampan's voice on the tape?
Response. What I am saying here is that the newscaster would be reading the text, reading the statement, and had his or her voice recorded into a tape, then the tape would be played back on air.
If there was a statement by Q Sampon at B20, what would be the typical content of such a statement?
Response. The statements were mainly about promoting the offensive attack to win the victory at battlefields and appeals for people in the liberated zone along with the cadres and other people to support one another both at the battlefronts and the rear.
Thank you, Mr. Kim Vaughan. I want to move to another subject heading. The next subject heading is communication generally. Source document E3/380, Khmer 00357200, French 00485433, English 00365645. On this page, you said that the upper echelon communicated to the middle and lower echelons through letters. And sometimes the middle and lower echelons were summoned to meetings to receive plans. Want to deal first with letters. How did the letters get sent from the upper echelon?
The working procedure was arranged through messengers. Messenger had to courier letters from one place to another. So nobody else could assume this role. And messenger normally were people who were considered frank, honest, loyal, and they had come across a lot of obstacles. And in couriering the letters, they had to maintain the utmost secrecy.
And if one's taken an example of a letter being sent from the upper echelon down to what you called the middle echelon, what do you mean by the middle echelon?
The President. Witness, please hold on. The counsel is on his feet. You may proceed, counsel. Counsel. Kung Samon. Mr. President, I'm sorry to interrupt. The prosecutor is now asking the witness to refer to the letter without specifically mentioning any letter. So this was the second time he asked the same question, and I would like to object on this basis.
Mr. President, you have been at pains on a number of occasions in these proceedings to urge counsel to pick a relevant topic from the OCIJ statement and then to ask relevant, admissible, targeted, clarifying questions based on that extract. This witness has mentioned letters in the context of communication, and I'm simply asking for clarification to assist the court.
The President, the objection and the grounds for objection by the defense counsel is not sustained. The chamber needs to hear the testimony of the witness in responding to the last question posed by the prosecutor. Witness, I would like to bring up an example. The upper echelon means those who were above my direct superior. As for middle echelon, refers to the cadres within respective units. And as for the subordinate, those who were within each department or office, they refer to subordinates, but they were not members of the central committee. That's what I said. Because normally the directive or order was sent from the upper echelon to the middle echelon, and the middle echelon would hand down the decision to the subordinate. So I was down below and I received direction from the middle echelon.
Can you give us an example from your own experience of what sort of direction or instruction you were given as a subordinate based on these letters?
Generally, people at the lower level never receive letters from our lower levels only receive letters from our relatives. But as for letter from the upper echelon, we never receive them directly. We had to receive it from the middle echelon. But if they were personal documents, it was nothing secret. But if it were the letters from the upper echelons, they had to be kept with utmost confidentiality.
I want to move on to the next subject heading, please, if I may, which is, I'm going back to basic study sessions. Now, I'm not limiting this questioning to B20. So in the whole of the time, from 1971 to 1979, I'm dealing with the whole of this period with the next question. It's the same page references as those I've just given. And you said this. The Khmer Rouge cadre were usually summoned to attend basic study sessions to enable them to understand before plans were set for implementation. First question, how were cadre summoned to a basic study session?
Generally, they would tell individual members to attend a basic study session. And during that entire period of time, the training session in this context refer to the political training, political doctrination. Once they understood it, then they would be sent to the work field. And if they had not gone through the political doctrines or so, they would not be able to carry out the work. So they had to have a unified position or standpoint on the plan set before the activity were carried out. So we had to understand the things we had to do. So the cadres had to attend those basic training sessions. For example, if there was a plan to be executed, those cadres had to understand how to execute them.
Who would have set the plans in the first place?
It was not beyond my. It was beyond my capacity. It must have been planned by people in the upper authority.
What did the upper authority or the upper echelon mean to you?
Upper echelon means the senior leaders, those who set forth the plan of actions. So before any plan was carried out, then there would be a training documents or training manuals for conducting training sessions.
Who were the senior leaders?
When I was young at that time, Actually, it was based on my intuition. It was not by knowledge I gained through information, and to date I could assess the situation back then as follows. In the supreme authority,
mentioned the words political indoctrination. So what was the political message?
During the wartime, they train us how to engage in war. But when the war was over, we moved to the next phase of development, so we focus on development. But in the war times, we discuss only the warfares. But during the peacetime, we discussed reconstructing the country and national defense.
How many people would attend these basic study sessions?
The training sessions, both in the war times and the peace times, they were attended by combatants in various departments and offices. They were all trained.
Concentrating in the period after the 17th of April 1975, where were the basic study sessions held?
They were held at Borei Kaila, to my recollection.
How regularly were they held?
For those who were in the upper authority, it would last for months. But for those who were at the lower levels, it would last for 2 weeks or even 1 week. So it varied depending on the level of authorities.
So if we pause there and take a 2-week study session, who would be giving the political indoctrination at such a session?
After 1975, I was trained by the ministries of propaganda, because I was within the Ministry of Propaganda. There was one female minister, Madame Jonjat, as I mentioned earlier. She was the Minister of Propaganda and Education. So the political indoctrination was trained by her. She was the sole lecturer in that ministry.
If cadre attended a basic study session and had received this information for 2 weeks, what were they expected to do, if anything, with that information?
As I mentioned earlier, there were only 2 directions. First, we had to do everything to defend our nation and to also reconstruction our nation. For example, I was working with the printing house, so I had to handle my job efficiently and well.
I'm moving on to the next topic, which is the printing house after the 17th of April 1975. So this is the printing house in front of the Olympic Stadium. Source document E3/380 Khmer 00357197 French 00485429 leading into 30 and English 00365642. You said, I was assigned to organise a printing house. Who assigned you?
As a matter of fact, when I arrived in Phnom Penh, the handwritten magazine that I produced myself, I could produce actually one copy on reconstruction of the country. And afterwards, I was no longer involved in that. I had to assist the printing house in preparing for printing magazines and newspapers. As I said, I was there in the first place to prepare the headings of the article as well as certain cliches, and I also assisted in writing certain articles as well, particularly the heading of the newspaper. So I was not involved in the technical aspect of the printing house anymore in accordance with the designation.
I hope a straightforward question, Mr. Kim Bun. Who sent you to your tasks then, to do your writing?
Then the minister of Ministry of Propaganda and Education.
Who was that?
She was Yun Jat.
In terms of the various K offices, is this right? K25 through 26, 27, 28, 29, 30 and 31. Are they all sections of the state printing house, or have I got part of that wrong?
From K25 to 31, they were the offices subordinate to Ministry of Propaganda and Education. However, K25 was an office where the minister worked. And now it is also a ministerial office in front of the Olympic Stadium, and the place where I worked was the former National Salvation newspaper during the Khmer Republic.
Can you just help me on this? The Salvation newspaper, or the National Salvation newspaper, can you help me? Was that a pre-existing newspaper in Phnom Penh before you arrived, or not?
The National Salvation newspaper was established during the Lonal administration. It was located in front of the Olympic Stadium. It was adjacent to a boxing center.
So I have it clearly. That then is a functioning newspaper premises, complete with printing presses and all the machinery that is needed to produce a newspaper. Is that right?
President, witness, please repeat your statement, because just now the microphone in front of you was not activated, so please repeat your question. Witness. Yes, you are right. That place was capable of printing a newspaper because it was the pre-existing printing house.
Next topic. What K25 produced and how? Source document E3/381. Khmer 00357205. French 00402997. English 00365528. You said that K25 published the Revolutionary Flag and the Male and Female Youth magazine, and that there was a group of writers, the interview section, the writing section, and the editing section. Now, Mr. Kim Bun, I'd like you, please, and if it helps, use this courtroom as an aid to explaining things. But if we look at the size of this courtroom, or the whole building, using that as a guide, how big were the offices at K25?
Response. The printing house attached to K25 was rather small, and the printing house adjacent to K26 was bigger, but the most modern one was attached to K27. Of course, at K26 we could print magazines as well, but mainly it was meant to print the cover page of the Revolutionary Flag and the Revolutionary Youth Female and Male Youth magazine and the Revolutionary Flag. But at K25 it was used to print the subsequent pages of the Revolutionary Flags and other documents. But as for the cover pages, it was printed at K26. At K27, they printed certain documents in foreign languages, including French and English as well.
Of the 4 sections of K25 that you mentioned, which section did you work in?
At K25, my first workplace, actually I was the assistant to the printing house. As I said, I was assigned to assist in preparing the headlines for various articles And then later on, after I had subsequent training on photographing, so then I was transferred to a different section where I was tasked to write articles in the revolutionary newspaper.
Just going to concentrate for one moment on the first part of your answer, which was to do with writing up headlines. Do I have it right that you'd have to read a document before you could write a headline for it? Or was the headline given to you?
Generally, before we print the newspaper, we had to have headlines, and inside the newspaper, we had to arrange the headings. At that time, they had to prepare letters by handwriting, and they wanted to appear nice as well. So at that time, I used the Chinese ink, and then they were copy and offsetting, because normally the leaders did not want the typewritten articles to be printed. They wanted the handwritten heading. Well, I actually only assisted in preparing those headings.
The texts were not, the printed texts were not good enough to be reprinted, but the written text would be better for the later on printing purposes, and or to enlarge or to make them smaller.
The written text is better for printing at this stage. My question was relating to, Mr. Kimvun, the headline. In other words, if we imagine a piece of paper with some writing on it, and above the writing there's a headline, who came up with the words for the headline? Was it you or somebody else?
Response. Normally, the minister of the ministry would convene meetings of the writers to share input of how to come up with the best words for headlines for the magazines. And we gathered information, and we follow the majority opinion concerning the wordings.
At this early stage, was it Choi who was head of the writers' team?
Response. Bong Chai was a student from the Royal University of Phnom Penh, and during the 3 years period, people who had been affiliated with the resistance movement were those who were former students or professors or teachers. That's why he or she would be recruited to work at the printing house to help write news articles. Choi was promoted to be the head of the unit. He was former or old-timer resistance person in Phnom Penh, so he became the head of the unit.
When was the first time you saw a front page to any revolutionary flag magazine?
Response. I'm afraid I do not quite catch your question. You're referring to the first page or the first cover of the page, or did I see the page first?
It was a bad question, Mr. Kimball, and I'm going to rephrase it. Do you know when the first issue of Revolutionary Flag came out?
Response. The revolutionary flag was first published in 1970s, early 1970s, perhaps 1971 or 1972, because by the time I started working at the printing house, there had been several copies of the flags already. They classified the flags into two. At that time, there was not yet the issues of the revolutionary youth magazines. However, I do not recollect very well whether the magazines were already issued by 1971 or 1972, and I know that some magazines for the front were already printed back then.
Next subject. The source of the material for the revolutionary flag. Source document E3/381. Khmer 00357205. French 00402998. English 00365528. You said that the writers came from the party centre. Who were the writers from the party centre?
Response. I do not know, but I believe that they could have been from the CPK party center. I did not know who wrote them. However, on the annotation or the revised versions of the magazines, I noted that the writing could have belonged to Brother Paul. The President, Mr. Witness, you are here to only tell the truth, nothing but the truth. You are not supposed or not allowed to give your pure speculation when giving testimony.
Mr. Kimball, I'm not sure if the President heard the back end of your answer. Don't rely on anything other than personal knowledge in asking my next question. But the back end of your answer was something about the writing of Brother Poll? Now, from your own knowledge and not relying on any source, are you saying for any reason that you recognised the writing of Brother Poll?
Response. I guess I still recognize his. Because documents that I used as the sources for my writing had some annotations, some of which belong to Pol Pot.
Given the whole of the length of a time that you were involved with handling written material, are you saying that you recognised the handwriting of any other leaders?
Response. I had just come to learn about this at a later date. Before, I had not known about this. But for the revolutionary flags, none of the lower level cadres could have been writing such texts, because they were about political lines, about theory, ideology, and none of the lower level people could be knowledgeable to produce such texts. So I believe they must have been written by the people at the leadership. And with regard to the text that I rely upon in my writing of the news, there were some annotations, revised version that could have been written by several authors.
Just to clarify, if the material you were looking at contained annotations, are you saying that you could recognise the handwriting on those annotations?
Response.
Mr. Kimball, I'm afraid I didn't hear the response to that question. Would you like me to raise the question again?
Response. Please do it again.
Right, the question is this. In respect of any material, written material, that you saw in the whole of the time that you were at the printing house, containing annotations, are you saying that you could recognise the handwriting on the annotations?
The President, Mr. Witness, please respond again, because your first response was not heard because you made it when the mic was not activated. So it was like no answer. So please do it again. Response. To respond to your question, I understand that the annotations are recognized by me, because normally the text, for example, if I had to write based on the text, I had to ask people for clarification if we did not understand the annotations on each of the text, because oftentimes the text came with brief annotations and we could recognize them. That's why I say, yes, I am, and the annotation belong to Brother Paul, because I asked a question to Chum, and the front also asked a question if they did not understand anything about the text. The President intervenes. Thank you, Mr. Witness and Mr. Co-Prosecutor, because it is now appropriate time for the adjournment. The Chamber will adjourn until 3 p.m. Court officer is instructed to assist Mr. Witness during the break. And Mr. Co-Prosecutor, you are advised to tell the Chamber how you manage the time or allocate the time among civil party lawyers when we resume. Thank you.